I'm a little bit slower these days. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank Derryn's family and also his PA and carer, Annette Philpott, for inviting me to speak today. It's a real honour, like all of us who are coming up today, either performing or talking. It is such an honour, and it was such an honour to know that guy. Well, where do I start with Mr. Hinch? Because I'm one of the older people here. We go way, way back. Obviously, at the beginning, as far as radio is concerned, I can relate that to you. It's a station called 3XY. It's a rock station, or as Derryn used to call it, a rocky jockey station. It was number one at the time, but it needed revamping. So early in 1978, that's nearly 50 years ago, even before FM. Can you believe that? We didn't even have FM, just the scratchy old AM signal. But it was early 78 and the station was making program changes. And looking to what was happening at 3XY sister station in Sydney, 2SM, the idea was to match a journo with a disc jockey. Bit weird, but anyway, in the morning slot between 9 and midday. The format was working pretty well at 2SM with Gibson and Moore. Now, Mike Gibson, a newspaper journo, a sporting journo in Sydney, very well known at the time, knockabout sort of guy, was teamed up with a disc jockey, George Moore. Not the jockey as horse jockey, but disc jockey. And George Moore would be the time and temperature guy, spin the records, and do all those sort of things that Derryn wouldn't or couldn't do. So down came Derryn to Melbourne from the Sydney Sun, where he was editor. And believe me, and if you look at he used to have a shirt that we opened down to here and hair. Hair, just imagine this real good looking rooster. Bear in mind, it's so long ago, I was in my early 30s and he was in his early 30s. And he came down to 3XY and into Melbourne. And it was a bit like Zorro riding into town on his horse. It was absolutely amazing. Along with producer and writer Terry Hayes. Remember that name? I understand he now lives in Switzerland, of Mad Max 2 fame. The pair arrived to make a statement. Well, a lady by the name of Prue Porter of 3XY was given the job of getting the Hinch name out there in Melbourne because he's a Sydney guy. No one in Melbourne knew him. As soon as the Hinch program was over at midday on 3XY, they hit the town, attending events, clubs. For instance, at night time, you'd often see him at the underground or whatever, or wherever he would seek publicity and therefore stories for the newspapers. Because what you do, you make sure that the journos are all there, everyone that you needed to talk to, television was there. And Derryn, as we know, a human headline, just made headlines. As soon as he opened his mouth, he said something outrageous. Keep in mind, the guy was not known in Melbourne at all. And within months, it started to work. We're getting front page stories in the papers about Hinch doing outrageous things. Now, it was also in early 1978, I started at 3XY as news director, having been transferred from 2SM in Sydney. And I knew Derryn was a big hitter, ready to tackle any issue. That's how he was making his name in this town, because no one else was doing it. You had Bert Newton up the other end of town on the old 3UZ. It was a bit like Bert Disneyland, and Derryn was Psycho. That was the comparison. Now, I realised that he was a heavy hitter, but one night we're out and I told him about a pact between the media in Adelaide, newspapers, TV and radio, and the then Premier Don Dunstan. Now, Don Dunstan at the time asked the outlets to keep under wraps the fact that his wife, Adele Coe, had cancer. Now, I told Derryn this out of innocence, and I tell you what, it was a bit like a red rag to a bull. The next morning on 3XY, he blew the story on air, and with it, blew up the close-knit and rather small media community in Adelaide. They could not believe that Derryn would go to air with this. And believe me, Don Dunstan and the phone call I got, he was not very impressed at all. Now, the strict music format at 3XY caused Derryn problems. It was a rock station, so rock stations play music. And normally you'd play about 8 tracks an hour. But they did say to Derryn, please play at least 5 songs an hour. He refused, and there was nothing that his sidekick, Keith Wally Williams, could do about it. Keith was the button pusher, the time and temperature guy, like George Moore in Sydney. And there was nothing that he could do about it. So they then wheeled in another great of radio, and you might remember this name, Stan Rofe, to monitor the number of songs that Derryn would be playing on XY in his shift, 5 per hour. Now, Stan, for some reason, I mean, he was a big-time disc jockey at 3UZ, and then he ended up at 3XY. But after a week of monitoring the number of music tracks Mr. Hinch would allowed to be played, he gave up. Stan absolutely gave up. And I never forget this morning, he ran out screaming. In fact, he was crying. I felt sorry for the poor guy. He just could not get Hinch to play all these songs. Now, another interesting time was at 3XY promoting the movie Xanadu. You remember that one? All the disc jockeys went to the preview of Xanadu, and, you know, like music stations, they all get behind it and say, oh, what a wonderful show, best show ever, go to see Xanadu. Well, Derryn got on there the next morning, and I'm going to quote him here because I wrote this down at the time because it was one of the many Hinch quotes that you learned over the years. This is Derryn. I saw Xanadu last night. My recommendation, Xana don't. Well, the program director and the publicity department at 3XY and also the movie theatre, they had heartburn, believe me. Here's Derryn saying, don't go and see it, it's terrible. Oh, it's awful. By the time 1978 was coming to a close, either Derryn got sick of 3XY or the station of him. I'm not too sure whether 3XY was the first station that he got sacked from or he just got sick of it or anything, I don't know. Anyway, they parted company only for him to move across to 3AW, his real home, and of course the rest is history. Like many of us, I didn't see Derryn every day, week or even every month. But we did catch up for the occasional lunch, a bunch of us at the All Nations in Richmond, including John Michael Housen, Tony Tardio was there, and of course my mate Darren James, quite a few others. And Derryn would always come along and he'd sit there and talk to John Michael. These two old friends, you know, going back years and years, going back 50 years. And it was just because I organised those lunches, and it was just a delight to see Derryn and John Michael talk to one another and reminisce, and did it so well. Derryn Hinch was a delight. And goodbye, my friend. I mean, 50 years knowing you has been a privilege, and I never thought someone like you would come into my life, and thank you. Rest in peace. Without you, life will not be the same. Thank you.